Okay, hi Beth, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Doug. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Nice to have you here. So you're kind of a industry professional, I see. And one question that I had right off the bat is why do they call news anchors anchors? Is that because they're anchored to their desk and they don't move as opposed to a reporter?
Sure, that sounds great. You know, that's a very unusual question that I haven't ever heard before, and I don't have a great answer for that.
Well, I never knew why they were referred to as anchors, only that they just stayed at the desk. They were anchored to their desk. Because Walter Cronkite was never referred to as a reporter. He was always referred to as a news anchor. That was his
Right.
official title.
And he was anchored to the desk.
Yeah.
And, so it seems like a plausible answer.
Well, okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to stump you with the very first question that I was going to ask.
And I did anchor for a little bit in Houston and just a little bit in Philadelphia, but I was much more of a reporter, drawn to the front lines and the action. So, I can speak to more to being a reporter than an anchor per se. Um, but they were anchored to the desk, that's for sure.
Well, let's just go with that. Okay. We'll just accept that
Okay,
as
sounds
the
great.
answer until somebody comments that no, that's not what it means at all. And then
Or they correct us,
I'll
whatever.
stand corrected at that point. So you are you currently still at KSTB, or was that in your former life?
That was in my former life. I left there just shy of 5 years ago.
You left just as COVID was sort of coming on.
As COVID was coming on, but there were a few different reasons why I left, and COVID actually didn't have anything to do with it. I A couple of reasons that I left, and it was not the way that I wanted to leave. I did leave on very good terms with my TV station. I loved working there, but I had contracted Lyme disease on the job while I was there. I was covering a very high-profile double murder and abduction of Jayme Closs in Barron County, Wisconsin. And there were massive searches going on to find her in the Wisconsin woods at the time. And I was bitten by a tick and I started to become very ill. Turns out I had Lyme disease. And so I was becoming very sick. And when you're a reporter in the field covering major disasters, um, it becomes very difficult to maintain your energy level and going out in the field every day to cover these sorts of stories. And then in addition to all of that, I was working through all of that, but then of course in May 2020, the in police custody death of George Floyd happened, and that was on my watch, on my shift that day, May 25th, I believe. And that happened. And of course, we all know that that's kind of where the riots started in downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul, and of course, spread to the rest of the country. And the first few days of the riots in Minneapolis, I was shot in my hip. And I recovered from that and continued to cover the riots. We worked 12 days on, or 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And then fast with these riots were going on continually. And then in July of 2020, a protester pointed a gun at my head and said, "Your media, you're next." And that's when I decided, after 30 years in the business, that is not the way I wanted my career to end and my life to end, frankly. Um, so that was the last day I worked.
Do you know who shot at you?
I do not.
So it
I
just
do not.
a stray
We,
bullet came from somewhere.
I, the stray bullet came from somewhere. I wish I knew who shot me. And we did try to, track that person down. But it was at the time when all of the protesters were breaking into the liquor store right across from the third precinct. So it was that initial mayhem of tens of thousands of people, in the streets breaking into liquor stores, the post office, all around a Target when they did that massive looting at Target. And I was with my crew, and I remember grabbing my left hip going, man, that hurt. And I kept kind of massaging it, but my photographer had been hit in the head with a wood beam, and so many people were getting injured at the time. I thought, ooh, somebody either ran into me or something. But I kept rubbing my hip, and then I looked down, and I'm like, oh, that wasn't that wasn't getting hit by a bar or a piece of wood. I was definitely hit by either they were using concrete bullets at the time. The protesters police were using other less lethal forms of ammunition. So I don't know who it was that shot at me, but yes, I was injured. And so, after all of that and dedicating my life to the news business for 30 years, I thought, this is not the way I want to go out, but I think in the best interest of my safety and how this is going, I'm going to take a step back.
So your book, let's pivot over to that, is called Standby. And this is a memoir of the past 30 years of your career?
It is. It focuses in on a particular time frame of my career, and some of these elements of the George Floyd and other stories that I've covered, we weave into the book. And I wrote the book. There was not a ghostwriter or anyone else. I did have an editor at the end kind of help me condense it to make it as concise as possible, because I wanted it to also be a fast read for people, because I don't believe folks have a lot of time on their hands anymore, and I wanted to pack the information in as succinctly as possible. But it covers my career from being a little cub reporter in Joplin, Missouri, and some crazy things that I saw and experienced there, to then I was a reporter and anchor in Houston, Texas, and some things that I experienced there. And then Philadelphia, which is a great news town and very competitive and, run and gun. And while I worked in Philadelphia, that also is when 9/11 happened. And that's also when the advent of cable television really kicked up into high gear. And so I was working for the NBC affiliate at the time. So we were doing live shots for MSNBC and CNBC. And I happened to be on air doing a live shot for the local NBC in Philadelphia when 9/11 happened. And I was covering the largest teacher strike in U.S. history at the time. And I was waiting for the anchors to toss to me. And we saw this on the monitors as we were watching, waiting for the anchors to toss to me. This plane crashed into a building, and the crew and I thought, ooh, this is awful. That takes your breath away. And we're watching the monitor. And when we saw the second plane hit, the crew and I just went silent, and we started taking our microphones off, packing up our gear. And because we knew, training kicks in, we knew this was something more than just an accident. And so I covered 9/11. And then when I moved to Minnesota, we weave in stories of me covering Prince's overdose death, the confession of Jacob Wetterling's kidnapper and killer, the murder of Jayme Closs's parents and her abduction that sent out the nationwide Amber Alert for 3 months back in 2019. The Red Lake school shooting where 10 people were killed. Chai Bang, people might remember that, the hunter who went into the Wisconsin woods and killed 6 other hunters. Alfonso Rodriguez, people might be familiar with that case. He killed Drew Shadeen in far northern Wisconsin or Minnesota. And it turns out, he was a convicted predator prior to that. So yes, I've covered many stories like that. And we weave that in. I weave that into the book with other experiences and then things that lead into perhaps reasons why I might drink at the end of my news shift.
Well, that was just what I was going to allude to, because the book seems to, at least from the description here, it was more of a focus on your struggles with alcohol, presumably, right?
Yes, yes,
And
yes. And it was
okay,
alcohol.
all right. So that's woven into all of these major news stories. Is sort of your struggle through all of these, correct?
Yes, and how a high functioning alcoholic, could still cover all of this and kind of still be at the top of your game. But, when you cover all of people's stories and what they have survived and the emotions they go through, and you kind of realize when you take a big step back that you are a part of these stories too, because you are struggling. People just don't know it. On the outside, everything looks fine and you're covering other people's anguish. And inside, I'm struggling with my own little demon.
Well, I know from personal experience, my father was an alcoholic, and this was back in the time before Betty Ford and before any significant kind of rehab, and even people's attitude about it at that time was, well, middle class people are not alcoholics. That's only people on Skid Row. And, he went through it during that period. But he was sober for 18 years, something like that. And it
Oh, that's
always
great.
takes some kind of a traumatic event to trigger that shift in thinking. Oh, yes, I have a problem. I mean, that's the first step, I think. Was that the two DUIs for you that sort of did it? That you said, you know what, I better sit down and reassess my life at this point?
I wish it were clean cut like that, Douglas. I really do. There were many major warning signs for me, and I wish I had grabbed the bull by the horns earlier. But with alcoholics, and in my case in particular, I was in denial. And after I got my first DUI, the bosses that was working for, said, "Hey, Beth, do you have a problem here? We can get you help." And no one wants to grow up and be an alcoholic and be labeled an alcoholic. And I cringed at the thought. I'm hard charging and I loved my job and didn't want to think of myself like that. And so I said, no, I don't have a problem. And this is a one-off. Um, and so, there were some minor repercussions for me the first time around. And the company that I worked for actually had a zero tolerance policy. Um, but they said, you helped to put us on the map. We're going to go to bat for you. This will be the one and only chance you get. If this happens again, Beth, you will be fired. And I was like, duly noted. I love my career and my job and where I worked more than anything. And I really thought, okay, I can pull this together. Um, and there were a couple of other incidents where I was pulled over and not cited after that first one. But then the second one happened, and I was driving on a highway going home after being out for the evening. And I kind of thought, oh, if I get up to like 3 drinks, I got to go home. That's what I would tell myself. I could go up to 3 drinks and then I got to get home. And I was on my way home. And unfortunately, I hit another driver on the highway from behind. And so I dented his bumper. Fortunately, the driver was not injured. Thank goodness. And neither was I. No one else was injured on the road. But when I got home, I was arrested at my home, and I have no memory of that accident to this day. 16 years later, still no memory. And so what I share with you is what I've read from police reports and my court case and all of that. So what got me to realize, Beth, you're an alcoholic, you've got a problem, and you have no choice but to start to, hold up the mirror and face yourself, was going back to my TV station and facing a boss that I really had great respect for, who stuck his neck out for me the first time and had warned me. and to sit there face to face and get fired. Get fired from the job I loved and the life I loved in a very public way. And the words he said to me were, "You were a star here, you had a job for life, and you are no longer useful to us. You are fired."
Wow.
And that just was a stab to my heart.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, "When you leave here, there's a taxi waiting for you outside." And that was when I knew, my day had come. The day of reckoning for me had come.
I think on that, we're going to have to end the interview because we are just right out of time. But I think it's a good spot because now people should pick up the book and find out what happens next.
Well, that's a cliffhanger, huh?
There we go. Beth, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. The book is called Stand By, and the author is Beth McDonough. Has the book been released? I guess not, right? Not yet?
No, gosh, I wish it has been. We are so close. It's, at the end, they're doing the artwork, the front cover, back cover, and my author's website, where the book will be available, is under construction as we speak. It will be sold everywhere books are available, Amazon, Kindle, Barnes and Noble. We'll do a big nationwide book launch, and we'll keep you in the loop about that.
Okay, great. Is pre-order available at this point or not yet?
Not yet. We're so close.
Okay. Well, we'll update our social media when it does come out. And
okay. Thank you, Douglas, for your time.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and best of luck with the launch. I hope it goes well.
Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you.